This week, John finds out why these families were awarded £18,000 by the High Court but haven't received the money. David looks at the best kettles to buy. We have news about dangerous toys to look out for this Christmas. And as Austin Rover recall their three-door Metro, I ask how well does the car recall system work? Hello and welcome to For What It's Worth. And we start this week with toys. Dangerous toys are once again being sold all over Britain. We have a few collected by Liverpool and Birmingham Trading Standards Department. And John, you've got the first.
Yes, this musical Jack-in-the-Box pops up with such force it could knock a child clean out.
And there are these toys with loose hair. Recently, an 18-month-old almost choked on the hair, and last year, a toddler died.
This toy oven, imported from Mexico for 5 to 9-year-olds, has shown up in Northumberland and Hampshire. It's designed to be plugged into the mains, and it's got live parts which can be touched by children. And the inside temperature can reach 135 degrees centigrade.
The paint on these Christmas tree decorations in the shape of trains and clowns and animals is toxic and dangerous if children put them in their mouths.
All the same, point 3. All of these points are in favour of the jugs. But which found that some of the jugs were tricky to pour accurately when you were pouring quickly? Point 4. On a more serious note, small children and boiling kettles are a dangerous combination responsible for something like 300 accidents every year in the UK. Well, surprisingly, there's not much difference in stability between the jug kettles and the traditional ones. In other words, you're no more likely to overturn a jug than a traditional one. Certainly, rubber feet or matte feet make a difference, as do locking or tight-fitting lids to keep the flow of scalding water, should the thing be overturned, down to what comes out of the spout. But you can't do better than making sure that the kettle and flex are always out of harm's way. So, there's the facts and findings. We can do no more. It's up to you now. But if you want a jug, then the Boots automatic jug at £15 is good value. The Philips Super Automatic HD 4358A at £18. And the Tefal Super Sprint 2010 at £20 are both worth thinking about. And the Russell Hobbs Topline Automatic 3860 at £24 is good but pricey. And if you decide to stay trad, the Kenwood Automatic A144 at £18 is good value, and the Russell Hobbs K3 Automatic at £20 is worth thinking about.
David, and details of that report will be in our fact sheet. The address to write to for a copy comes at the end of the programme. Over the years, we've done stories on this programme about Volvos in the 340 automatic series, built after 1978, which apparently ran away with their drivers. We've heard of 100 cases where this is alleged to have happened, but Volvo UK Limited always maintained that the accidents which continued to happen over the years were due to driver error. Then in June of this year, 3 years after our first programme on the subject, Volvo announced that they were recalling the 340 automatic. I asked Marcus Jacobson, former chief engineer at the AA, why Volvo had recalled the car.
Because the numbers had in fact accumulated, and in the end there were some tests which they accepted, both by the ministry and by myself and my staff, that proved that there was in fact the probability of it developing into something which could cause an accident.
What was that fault?
The fault is that your gear selector mechanism could be in a halfway position, and people believed they were neutral or they were parked when in fact they were already pre-engaged gear, and it slipped into gear as you put your accelerator down and you just shot forward or backwards as the case may be.
We hope Volvo's recall will put an end to these problems, but despite our coverage and other press reports, the fact remains that this took 3 years. So why do recalls take so long? Tonight, we examine the recall system and ask how effective is it in protecting the public. And we look in detail at a recent recall of the 3-door Austin Rover Metro. The police Metro car, driven by the most trained, highly skilled drivers on the road. Surely one of the safest vehicles of all. Or is it? 8 police Metros have shot out of control. In Cumbria there were 5, and in the West Midlands there were 3. And in Northumbria, the police have compiled a report of 7 accidents involving members of the public driving Metros. Apart from these accidents, About 70 incidents, all involving fuel spillages, have been reported to the Department of Transport over the last 2 years. So what exactly happens? Bob Holt, who runs an accident rescue service in Bingley, has dealt with several three-door Metro incidents.
We actually were called out to an accident where a Metro was involved. We tested the car round a small area of the garage that we were at, and we found that petrol was coming out of the petrol filler cap or around that area onto the back wheel, which made it turn into a spin at, I would say, around about 5 miles an hour.
How many cases did you have?
We had approximately, I would say, about 6 cases of it, just in a local small country garage, you know, which I think's quite a lot.
One of the three-door Metro cases which Bob Holt handled involved June Shaw, who had an accident in her car in January this year. June had just filled her car with petrol.
I was driving home from work one night and it was wet, and I was going round the left-hand bend and the car just went out of control. It spun across the road into a wall, and I just remember shutting my eyes and thinking that I was a goner. The front end of the car hit the wall and was badly damaged. The back end hit a barrier which caused damage to the back end, but I was spun back onto the road, and I just sat there in a dazed state, glad I was still alive.
I think one of the main causes, which was in June's case, was that she'd just called in for some petrol, and the petrol filler cap was not fitted correctly, which caused petrol to go out onto the back wheel again, which to me is quite a natural mistake that any pump attendant could make. Really, there ought to be a foolproof way of putting that cap on, so that a pump attendant or indeed an owner knew that that cap was fitted correctly.
Andre Prové's Metro was also involved in an accident.
Well, my son very unfortunately had an accident driving my Metro when he left early one morning after filling it the previous night, and suddenly the car swerved round and hit a brick wall. We afterwards got the car back to the main dealers we bought it from and said, look, this doesn't seem like an ordinary accident. Why should a car go off the road? And are there any faults? They said, no, not a fault to be found on the car. It's perfectly all right. After that, I wrote to the autocar, and the autocar said, yes, they had had other complaints of the same thing happening, left-hand bend, full petrol, and the car suddenly swerved round.
Autocar magazine first received complaints in 1984 and decided to investigate the three-door Metro incidents. They weren't too impressed with the sighting of the filler neck.
As you can see on these cars, it's very low, and I think it's actually sighted in a rather tricky position. If there are any fuel spills, the immediate result is to go onto the back tire.
We decided to see for ourselves what exactly happens when quantities of fuel spill onto the offside rear tyre on a left-hand bend. This is the effect.
Contrary to popular opinion, petrol doesn't help grip on tarmac at all. In fact, it's like driving on ice, particularly where you've got a front-wheel drive car and therefore very lightly laden back wheels. And it actually becomes quite dangerous.
And as the demonstration shows, the car will spin. Autocar found that fuel spillages were being caused by one of 3 things. Petrol was escaping through the breather pipe, or through the petrol cap, or in one example, through a missing piece of return pipe.
The effect in all these cases is the same, which is that you end up with petrol on the offside rear tire, and as soon as that happens in a left-hand bend on the loaded tire, the car will simply spin.
What did you do with your evidence?
We, after we finished with the tests, we forwarded the information and also the names and addresses of the people that Bob Holt had come to us with. We forwarded the whole lot to Austin Rover.
Austin Rover has made modifications to the breather pipe on new models, but despite the fact that Autocar reported their findings to Austin Rover in 1984, it has taken the company 2 years to do anything about the petrol cap. Last week, the company wrote to all 600,000 owners of three-door Metros, telling them to go to their nearest dealer to get a new petrol cap. But even now, Austin Rover, who didn't wish to appear in our film, are insisting that this is not a recall. They told us,
It's just a service action which we're implementing under the Code of Practice for recalls.
I think it's semantics. We know that Austin Rover are contacting every owner of a three-door Metro car who might be involved in this. That's a very good thing. I mean, it's just like a recall campaign. The only element missing is that because it isn't seen as a safety defect, the Department of Transport won't be monitoring how many cars have been in, and Austin Rover won't be having to say what their success rate has been.
Austin Rover is claiming that this is simply a service action and not a safety recall. Is that your opinion of it?
No, I think that is a bit of playing semantics. Basically, I'm happy that they're doing something about it, but I still would like to see it treated as a safety one, because it does, in fact, prejudice the handling of the car under certain conditions.
I think Austin Rover should have reacted a lot quicker. We reacted quickly to the accident, and I think really once they got wind of this, they should have sent somebody around to us to see what we were talking about, and maybe then it wouldn't have taken so long to sort out.
The Car Recall Code of Practice is the responsibility of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, along with the Department of Transport. But why does it take so long to recall cars?
Well, firstly, the manufacturer has to be satisfied that it affects a significant number of vehicles. There's no point in carrying it out if it's only going to be one or two, because they can be tracked down much more easily. And then he's got to make sure that before the public is asked to bring its cars in, that the dealers are prepared for it and they've got the parts available to fit. So there's quite a large logistical operation which does take some time.
Since 1979, 3 million vehicles and components have been the subject of recall actions. There are some 16 million cars on the road today, so there's a strong possibility that many of us could be involved in a recall in the course of our driving life. But if something goes wrong with your car, how can you find out if other people have reported similar problems?
It's almost impossible to do so. You can't just ring the Department of Transport and say, hey, has my car ever been the subject of a recall? They will then say, no, you've got to contact the manufacturer. It can't be beyond the wit of man for them to have some sort of safety hotline so that a new owner could ring in and check whether that car has ever had the necessity for a recall and then whether the work was done or not.
It certainly happens in the States. The Freedom of Information Act and the liability laws over there are such that it is possible to get information. They have hotlines, consumer hotlines, where it's possible to check out if you have any problems with your car, if other people have similar problems. I think we could do with something like that over here, definitely.
We agree. Why do recalls take so long, and why are they not given more publicity? We had wanted to put these questions to the Department of Transport, but they would not be interviewed. Meanwhile, how many owners of second-hand cars are quite unaware that their model should have been recalled? It's high time we had a recall telephone hotline, as they have in America. And that's all for this week. The address to write to for a copy of the fact sheet follows. See you next week. Until then, goodbye. Another update now. Last December, we had a report about the car recall system in the light of Austin Rover's decision to recall 600,000 three-door Metros that had defective filler caps. As we demonstrated on the programme, under certain circumstances, if the car was going around a left-hand bend, petrol could leak out of these caps onto the rear wheel, situated right beside it, and cause the car to skid out of control. This was a fault that Auto Car magazine had discovered 2 years earlier, but despite showing Austin Rover their findings, it was only last December that the company issued a recall to change all filler caps on three-door Metros. Was that recall issued soon enough? After our programme, we had a lot of letters from people who had all had very recent accidents in their Metros, including one from a man in Lancashire who said that his wife had been killed instantly when her Metro span out of control on a left-hand bend, apparently inexplicably, and hit an articulated lorry. That fateful accident happened last November. Other letters came from Linda Clues from Staffordshire, who suffered back injuries in September last year when the Metro she was driving skidded on a left-hand bend. She had a full tank of petrol. In October last year, Marlene Murphy from Merseyside had a similar accident, left-hand bend, full tank. And in November last year, Ralph Hooper from Wiltshire also lost control on a left-hand bend with a full tank and had severe facial injuries and fractures as a result. These were just a few of the accidents we've heard about, and they raise major questions about liability, insurance and compensation. In addition, we've heard from Metro owners who had not heard about the recall. Austin Rover declined our invitation to appear on the programme. But on a broader front, is the recall system working properly? Do people know soon enough if their car is faulty? Why don't we have a car recall telephone hotline to the Department of Transport, as they do in the States, so you, as an individual, can check whether your car has been recalled? Bill put this question to the Minister, Peter Bottomley.
I think that's a good idea, and we might be able to put together all the recalls we've had since '79 and make sure that every Consumer Trading Standards officer has got them. And there are ways we can make sure that the information we put out, and we've spent a lot of time and money putting this information out, can be made available in places where the public are. And we could, for example, have it in every Assistance Advice Bureau. We could try to make sure that franchise dealers have a note of recalls on the models they specifically handle. There are obviously ways of improving communication. If, for what it's worth, can find a way of making sure the recall information goes out effectively, which is as important and as interesting as which kettle to buy, we can get a long way further forward. And I think by working in cooperation, not that we can't occasionally criticise you, as I would, for example, over the stuff you put out on bus deregulation, or that you shouldn't criticise me, but there's an 80% overlap, and we're all there to serve the consumer.
Well, we can assure Mr. Bottomley that we will keep pressing for a recall telephone hotline. Let's hope he succumbs to our pressure and sets one up. We'll also keep pressing him about the effects of bus deregulation, a subject he's not so keen on.